having to kind of be privately. Now, one of the questions I kind of had, and I can't answer this one. I wonder, was it just as 12? Or because it literally says in one of the, right here we read the disciples. In Mark it says his apostles. And you know that Jesus had more than just 12. He had, at one point he had like 500, tons of people. A lot of people left him when he started saying, eat my flesh and drink of my blood. But, after that, he lost a lot, but he still had a group of people. So some people say, well, was it just his 12 or was it more? I don't know. I mean, he could have had his 12 sitting at that main table, and there could have been others sitting all around the room enjoying the Passover together. The important part was that he spoke to his 12. I mean, that was the big deal here. He was hiding out. He went through this great week, and he'd been telling his disciples the whole time, I'm going to die. I'm going here to die. And they're like, oh yeah, Jesus, you're just being crazy. I think a lot of times people just thought he was just insane. Like, yeah, whatever, Jesus, you're going to die, okay. It's kind of interesting because, he's sitting there and they're having this meal together, and he's saying all these things, but I think a lot of times he just didn't get it, A lot of things I think Jesus said. When you read through and you read the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you read these and you see, wow, that they just don't get this. One of the important things about the Passover as well is it marked the beginning of a new year. So on the Jewish calendar, when they would celebrate the Passover, this was like their New Year's Day celebration. God literally reset the calendar when he led them out of Egypt. When he led them, we read the story of Moses a few weeks ago where Moses led them out of captivity, that he literally reset the calendar and said, this is now the first day of the year. I want you to remember this is the first day of the year. One of the other things you got to imagine here, when you're imagining this room Jesus is sitting in, has all his disciples around. Not only have they already had 3 different Passovers with Jesus where he'd done these things, they had spent their whole life, every single year, having a Passover. These are Jewish men. These are men that were raised in Jewish culture. Every single year they had enjoyed this Passover meal with either their family or with their town or however they do it. So when we're experiencing it now, it's a little different and odd and like, wow. But for them, when it got to be the Last Supper and they were sitting in that room with Jesus, this was just a normal, everyday, like Christmas for us. You do Christmas a certain way, or Thanksgiving. You do Thanksgiving a certain way. Well, it's just a normal thing. Okay, this is what we do, and this is how we do it. Well, that's how it was with them with Passover. It was a normal thing. They had experienced, some of them, that were older, and some of them that were younger, they'd experienced a lifetime of Passovers already. Okay? So, what I want to do before I get started here and getting into the actual Passover, I want to go into a few things. You got to understand, first of all, the Passover originated back in Exodus chapter 12, where it talks about God telling the children of Israel when they were in bondage to Egypt, when they were slaves, he said, listen, this is the last night you're going to be here. And so you're going to celebrate this Passover meal. And it represented a few things, because first of all, like I said, it represented a new year. He said he's going to bring deliverance about, and bring about this deliverance to the children of Israel, from slavery. But one of the things, it was the end of the 10 plagues. There have been these 10 plagues on Israel, or on Egypt, that basically because the Pharaoh would not let the Israelites go. So the last of the plagues was that God would basically take his hand off of Egypt, and the death angel would come and kill all the firstborn. You know what's ironic? Do you know that's exactly what they had done to the Hebrews just about like 30 years before? That Pharaoh, the Pharaoh then, the original Pharaoh, had ordered that all of the Hebrew children, the firstborn, would be thrown into the Nile and be fed to the crocodiles. So, here we go a generation later, and they're reaping what they sowed. God, I don't believe, because a lot of people say, well, God sent this death angel. The death angel actually is referred to in Revelation, says he's thrown in the lake of fire. I mean, I don't really think he's, God's, hired gun or something around and kill people. I think what it was is that God removed his protection from Egypt. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he removed his protection, and then the death angel came and destroyed all the firstborn, because Pharaoh was just reaping what he sowed. But the death angel could not touch the Israelites for a couple reasons. Number one, the interesting thing about God is God's protection was based upon a blood covenant. And he had told them, if you will take blood and put it on your door as a mark, that death angel will pass over you. Why? Because that was a mark of my protection. That unblemished lamb would be sacrificed, and his blood would be put upon the doorpost, and that would protect you from this death angel. Now, it's interesting that when they celebrated it, one of the major things that they said you had to do is you had to be all dressed up, ready to go. You didn't just go and relax. You had to have your coat on. You had to have your shoes on. You had to be ready to go, because they said when you celebrate this, you're going to eat it, and you're going to eat it in haste, because the next morning you're leaving Egypt. One of the awesome things about this meal, and this is one of the symbols, and this is something you've got to remember. They ate this meal in faith. This was a faith meal. They didn't know they were going to leave Egypt. You know, Pharaoh could have got mad that all the firstborn were murdered. He could have went and killed all the Israelites. He didn't have to let them go. But they ate in faith. You see, they were eating this meal in haste, expecting to leave Egypt the next day. And even God said, he said, when you're done, because most of the time, you know, if you eat a meal and you got leftovers, what do you normally do? Well, you wrap them up, throw them in your refrigerator. God said, no, burn everything. Whatever's left, you burn it, because you're leaving the next day. You know, why did they eat unleavened bread? Because guess what? They didn't have time to let it leave them, because it was a bread of haste. They were on their way out. They were leaving. Okay? So it was a meal of faith. They had faith that basically God was going to bring about this deliverance he'd been promising for so long. Now here we've got back, I want to bring it back here to Jesus now. Jesus sitting in this room, the Last Supper. You know, the first, you know, Passover that basically would be explained in a Christian term. You know, where Jesus sits down and explains the true meaning of these symbols, these emblems. And you know, when you read it, you kind of say, well, I didn't read anything about bitter herbs or vinegar or an egg being hidden. What is all this stuff? You know, because I'm going to go on to some things and you're say, well, I didn't read that, you know, here in Luke. Well, because the person writing this assumes you already know how a Seder works. You know, the person writing this is only going to insert the important parts that Jesus changed. You know, I kind of look at it like, you know, if every year at Thanksgiving, you know, so-and-so says a prayer and then you cut the turkey and this person's in line first and they serve. Well, if you do that every year, you know, and somebody comes along and says, oh, well, you know, Isaiah ended up cutting in line and going first this year. Like, well, what are you talking about? That doesn't make sense. Well, if you knew this, basically the ceremony or the way that you do things, the tradition, you would go, oh, well, that's odd. He usually doesn't go first. Well, that's what's going on here with when the disciples wrote this, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when they were writing this, the gospel writers only included the things that changed. So you'll read certain places here where it'll say, and then after they ate, or when they drank of the last cup, or something. There are little things that he throws in there that if you don't understand a Seder, you're not going to understand what's going on here. Okay? So that's the thing. I like the details. So that's what we're going to do right now. So go ahead. I'm going to pause for a second. We'll have the kids come in, and you want to go get them. And then we'll go ahead and get started on this. One of the interesting things we're not going to do, just because I don't want to, when the original Passover meal would start, basically everybody would wash their feet. That was, you know, I mean, obviously because they've been walking around the dirt, but that was just part of they called them ceremonial washings. They used to wash their hands and all this kind of stuff. Well, what made the last Passover so interesting, Jesus went and washed all their feet. You know, and I'm not going to do that today. So.
Yes.
Hey guys, go ahead and come on, have a seat. You can sit. Actually, you guys get to sit on the floor right over here.
Okay, that's
on this side.
Can I look up on this side?
You're gonna have a sip.
What's the camera, people?
Okay.
Not yet.
Not
Can
yet. Not yet. Okay. Now this is what, like I was saying, I want you guys to do this. We're imagining that we're in the Last Supper with Jesus and his disciples, okay? And you're imagining you're in this room with him. And he is doing this Last Supper, and he's explaining to all of his disciples the true meaning of all these different things, okay? So, when the Passover originally began, one of the things is to talk about the elements. We have the 4 glasses of wine, in this sense is grape juice, because I don't let my kids drink alcohol. You have the unleavened bread, which they refer to as matzah. You have the vinegar, and actually it's like a wine and vinegar.
What about the egg?
You have the bitter herbs, and you have the boiled egg and the salt water. Okay, so each one of these things are going to have a symbol. Now, one thing you're going to notice that's missing from our Passover table is the lamb. Now, does anybody know why we're not enjoying a sacrificed lamb today? Isaiah?
Because, was it because they used to sacrifice lambs as forgiveness of sin, but we don't need that anymore?
Yep, because Jesus is our Passover lamb. Yes, Micah?
Lamb is also kind of nasty.
That's not the reason.
Thank God.
In 1 Peter it says that Jesus' blood was shed for our redemption, that we do not need to sacrifice a lamb anymore, that he is our Passover lamb. Okay?